All right, let's talk about Myanmar. You've got a country in the middle of a brutal civil war, and the military that's in charge decides it's time to hold an election. But for millions of people there, this isn't about politics or casting a vote. It's literally about survival. And really, to get what's going on, you just have to listen to the people who are living through it. This quote says it all, doesn't it? How can we support a junta-run election when this military has destroyed our lives? That right there is the core question. It sums up the feeling on the ground perfectly.
So let's dive into what this election actually looks like amidst all this fighting. Picture this. On December 28th, polls open. But this is not your typical election day. Far from it. This is a vote happening literally in the middle of a war zone.
And this chart, it shows you just how fractured this vote really is. I mean, look at that. This isn't a nationwide election by any stretch of the imagination. In a whopping 65 townships, that's a full fifth of the entire country, voting is just canceled. It's too dangerous. So right off the bat, millions of people have no say at all. Okay, so what about the places where people could vote? Well, from all the reports we're seeing, turnout was incredibly low. We're talking estimates of maybe only a third of people actually showing up. And that, of course, throws the whole legitimacy of this thing into serious doubt.
Right. So the big question is, how on earth did it get to this point? A military-run election during a civil war? It sounds wild. To make sense of it, we've got to go back a bit.
And things went downhill fast. It all kicked off back in 2020. Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the NLD, won the election in a landslide. But the military, they weren't having it. They cried fraud, staged a coup, and threw her and other leaders in jail. People took to the streets to protest peacefully, and the military responded with deadly force. And just like that, a civil war was ignited. So, as you can imagine, the world and a lot of people inside Myanmar are not buying this election. The criticism has been absolutely brutal, and some of the language used to describe it is, well, it's pretty powerful. You've got this stark contrast. The military junta is trying to sell this as, hey, this is us returning to democracy. This is for reconciliation. But then you have critics, like the folks at the UN, who see it completely differently. They're calling it a sham. And this one phrase really sticks. A theater of the absurd performed at gunpoint. Wow. And when you look at how the whole thing is set up, you can see why they're saying that. It's not exactly a fair fight. The most popular party in the country, banned. Its leaders, jailed. There's even a new law that makes it illegal to criticize the election. And guess who's running pretty much unopposed in a ton of places? The military's own proxy party. Shocker, right? And don't think that law is just for show. Oh no. It is very, very real. We're talking more than 200 people arrested since July just for speaking out. And get this, some of them were arrested just for liking a critical post on social media. The message from the junta could not be clearer. Keep your mouth shut. Okay, so while all of this political theater is going on, there's a real war happening, and you absolutely cannot separate the two. What's happening on the battlefield is shaping everything.
And the human cost? It's just staggering. I mean, look at these numbers. 90,000 people killed, 3.5 million people forced to flee their homes, and 22 million, that's nearly half the country's population, need humanitarian aid just to survive. That is the grim reality. That's the backdrop for this whole election. But here's a twist in the story. The tide of the war itself has been shifting. If you were watching late last year, it really looked like the rebel groups had the military on the ropes. They launched this huge offensive, Operation 1027, and were gaining ground fast. But now, the momentum has swung back. The military is making a comeback.
So you gotta ask, how did they pull that off? Well, it seems to be a combination of three big things. First, they started a mandatory conscription drive, basically forcing people to fight, which has massively boosted their numbers. Second, they've gone all in on drone warfare, becoming a major player on the world stage. And third, and this is a big one, they've gotten some crucial help from their powerful neighbor, China. And this whole situation isn't just dividing Myanmar internally. It's also drawing some very clear lines on the global stage. You've basically got two camps. On one side, you have the West, the US, the EU, the UN. They're all condemning the vote, calling it a sham, and they're not sending anyone to observe. But on the other side, you've got countries like China, Russia, and India. They're sending observers, offering support, and giving the whole thing a veneer of international legitimacy. So what's China's angle here? It's all about strategy.
It's not that Beijing loves the military junta. One analyst called them a necessary evil. See, for China, a total collapse of Myanmar would be a disaster. It would threaten their huge investments and, most importantly, their strategic economic corridor that gives them access to the Indian Ocean. So for them, a stable junta-run Myanmar is better than total chaos.
So what happens next? I mean, the outcome of this vote is pretty much a foregone conclusion. The real question isn't who wins. It's what, if anything, this election actually changes for the country. And this quote from Richard Horsey of the International Crisis Group hits the nail on the head. He says, "The outcome is hardly in doubt. The military's proxy party will win, and what you'll get is army rule with a thin civilian veneer. It's military control, just wearing a suit instead of a uniform." And that's the bottom line here. Pretty much every expert is saying this election isn't a solution. The UN rapporteur called it a ploy that's just going to keep the conflict going. So instead of being a way out of this nightmare, it's probably just going to dig the trenches deeper and make the war last even longer. And all of this leaves us with a really tough, sobering question. For the 55 million people trapped in this situation, if this election isn't the answer, if it's just a show to keep the military in power, then what is? What does the path forward actually look like for them?